The neon sign of Redwood Diner buzzed faintly against the night sky, its red glow spilling over the parking lot like a beacon for the tired and the hungry, a place where truckers, farmers, and locals gather to sip coffee and trade stories at the end of long days. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon and strong black coffee. A jukebox hummed softly in the corner, and conversations drifted lazily over the clink of cutlery. But the rhythm of the night shifted the moment the door creaked open and Marcus Reed stepped in, his tall frame casting a shadow across the linoleum floor. He wore no uniform, just a dark jacket over denim, his posture straight but unassuming, his face calm yet marked with the quiet confidence of a man who had weathered storms far fiercer than small-town gossip. He moved to the counter without hurry, offering Linda, the weary waitress, a polite nod before sliding onto a stool. He said softly, "Coffee, please," and his deep voice had an unexpected warmth that seemed to blend in with the dish clatter. He was just another stranger stopping in for a late-night drink, and most people thought of him as just another passerby. However, there was something about the way he carried himself, square shoulders, observant but gentle eyes, that set him apart, and no one knew why. Officer Travis Cole strode in young, brash, and encased in the confidence of his uniform like armor, as Linda poured his cup of coffee and the coffee pot hissed. As he scanned the diner, his eyes immediately landed on Marcus at the counter, striking the tile with a ferocious rhythm. Travis clenched his jaw. He didn't see respect, discipline, or the calm and experienced man. All he saw was a black stranger sitting like he belonged in his diner. As he strode forward, the officer's voice was audible from every booth, and his lips curled into a smirk. "Coffee's not free, you know," he drawled, each word coated in condescension. "You planning to pay for it, or just sit here like you own the place?" The diner's conversation abruptly stopped. Forks flew in midair, and everyone's attention turned to the counter. Linda froze mid-pour, the stream of coffee trembling as it filled Marcus's cup, her face pale with discomfort. Uneasy glances were exchanged by a couple in the booth near the door. The room itself seemed to be holding its breath, and even the jukebox seemed to be quieter. However, Marcus did not flinch. He lifted the steaming cup, took a slow sip, and set it back down with deliberate calm, his eyes finally meeting Travis's without anger, without fear, just a quiet steadiness that felt heavier than any shouted word. "I'll pay my bill," he said evenly, voice carrying enough weight to be heard by everyone but soft enough to feel almost like a kindness. That's all anyone needs to know. Travis, on the other hand, was not seeking tranquility, but rather a scene. His voice rose like a storm front as the officer leaned closer and tapped the counter. "Don't get smart with me. Folks like you don't just wander in here. Where's your ID? Let's see it. Right now." The diner was shaken by a mumble. Linda's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but fear kept her silent as an elderly man shifted uncomfortably in his booth. A young mother drew her child closer, and Marcus did not act or argue. He reached into his jacket pocket slowly, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and slid a card across the counter. Travis snatched it up with a mocking laugh, his voice carrying across the room. "A military ID? What are you? Some washed-up soldier trying to impress us?" He waved it as if it were a joke, ignoring its significance. The diners watched, shame tightening their faces, but no one spoke. Marcus simply rested his hands on the counter, his gaze never leaving Travis's, his patience acting as a barrier against the officer. The sharpness of Travis's sneer and his finger pointing just inches from Marcus's face broke the silence. "This is my community, my eatery, and I decide who belongs here. You sit there and act powerful, but I can see right through you." The tension was suffocating now, pressing down on every patron, pretending not to hear. Some people stared at their plates. Others watched wide-eyed, caught between fear and guilt. The coffee pot nearly fell over when Linda's hand began to tremble. And Marcus? He didn't say anything, push back, or move a muscle. He just sat, unyielding, as the storm of humiliation swirled around him. Even though the neon outside still buzzed and the jukebox still hummed faintly, it seemed as though time itself had narrowed into this single confrontation. One man seated calmly at the counter, unmoved, his quietness sharper than any blade, his dignity a shield that no insult could penetrate. Travis thrived on reaction, on flinches and fear, but Marcus Reed gave him none. And the absence of submission lit a fire of rage behind the young officer's eyes, neither in my town nor under my supervision. The words dripped with venom. Each syllable meant not only for Marcus, but for the room of silent witnesses whose silence emboldened him further, and in the booths around them people shifted uncomfortably, torn between conscience and cowardice. An older couple lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet Marcus's gaze. Two teenagers whispered nervously, unsure if they were watching a lawful act or an abuse they would regret never speaking against. A trucker near the back clenched his fists under the table but said nothing, knowing too well how far authority could reach when challenged. Linda swallowed hard, stepping closer with trembling hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "Officer Cole, he's done nothing wrong. He ordered his coffee, he paid before." But Travis whipped his head toward her, his glare silencing her instantly. "Stay out of this. Linda, unless you want to explain to your boss why you're letting strangers loiter in here." And the sharpness of his tone cut her down into silence, her cheeks flushing with shame as she looked at Marcus, guilt written in her eyes. Through it all, Marcus stayed seated, his gaze steady, his voice even when he finally spoke again. "I've shown you what you asked, officer, and I've done nothing here but drink a cup of coffee. If you believe that is not sufficient, then the issue may not be mine." The calmness infuriated Travis more than shouting ever could, because it robbed him of power. It made him look like a child screaming into a canyon only to have the echo return smaller than his own voice. And so he leaned in closer, his finger nearly touching Marcus's chest, spittle forming at the corner of his lips as he hissed, "Don't get clever with me. You think you're somebody special, but all I see is a man out of place, pretending to be something he's not. Here, men like you don't get respect. You take orders." His words landed heavy, and though the patrons sat frozen, their silence was no longer neutral. It was complicity, and the shame of it crept across their faces, but none yet found the courage to break the chain. Travis stood up, puffing his chest, and yelled, "Stand up," loud enough for the diner to hear. "Now, or I'll drag you out of here in cuffs." A young boy in the back booth clung to his mother and whispered, "Mama, why is he being mean?" as his threat rolled like thunder off the chrome fixtures and tile floors. But his mother hushed him quickly, her eyes darting nervously toward the officer. Marcus finally set his coffee cup down, the ceramic clink resonating in the stillness, and he turned his head just slightly, letting his gaze sweep across the diner, making eye contact with patrons who quickly looked away, then returned his eyes to Travis, his tone steady, low, but carrying the kind of weight that made even silence lean in to listen. "Son, I've been ordered around by men who earned the right to command. You're not one of them." Gasps rippled through the room, soft but unmistakable, the kind of sound people make when truth is spoken too boldly to be ignored. And for a flicker of a second Travis faltered, his jaw tightening, his pride stung, because deep down he knew authority isn't the same as respect, and this man's calm defiance threatened to unravel him in front of his audience. His face reddened. He grabbed Marcus's ID off the counter, holding it up as though to scrutinize it, but instead of reading carefully, he scoffed and tossed it back down, his voice dripping with mockery. "Colonel? Commanding officer? You expect me to believe that? If you were somebody important, someone would know your face. You wouldn't be in a diner in the middle of nowhere. You'd be in Washington or on television. Nah, you're just another who's been trying to impress small-town folks who don't know better." The cruelty of his words hung in the air like smoke, stinging everyone who heard them, and still Marcus didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of a rise, though inside the humiliation pressed heavy. Not for himself, but for the uniform he'd worn, the men and women he led, the honor being trampled in a diner where no one dared stand. Travis, mistaking Marcus's silence for weakness, pressed forward. "You see, folks, this here's a lesson. Don't let just anyone stroll into your community acting like they belong when they don't. Knowing your place earns respect, and his place certainly isn't here." He motioned broadly to the room, tried to rope the patrons into his performance, but instead of applause or agreement, he was met with uneasy shifting, a few lowered gazes, and the kind of silence that begins to feel like disapproval. Still no one spoke, and so, drunk on the sound of his own voice, Travis reached for his cuffs, snapping them open with a metallic click, the sound slicing through the diner like a blade as he growled, "Last chance. Stand up, or I'll put you in these right here. Walk you out so everyone sees what happens when a man doesn't respect the law." Linda's lips parted again, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please, Travis, don't." But the officer shot her a glare so sharp it cut her words short. Everyone in the diner was aware that the tension was getting to the point where it was suffocating, a storm that could break at any moment. But no one moved or spoke except Marcus, who finally raised his head, met Travis' eyes with a levelness that felt like stone, and said in a low voice that carried across the room, "Be very careful what you do next, officer. The weight of your choice won't be mine to carry. It will be yours, and everyone watching will remember who you showed yourself to be tonight." The words landed heavy, not just on Travis, but on every patron in the diner, a mirror held up to their silence. And though the officer's pride screamed for him to slam the cuffs down, to assert himself, some part of him wavered, his hand trembling ever so slightly with the realization that he was not in control of this moment the way he thought he was. The diner had become a courtroom, the patrons its jury, and though they hadn't spoken yet, their eyes were no longer indifferent. They were witnesses, and the verdict forming in their hearts was one that Travis could not command. Just as Travis's hand tightened around the cuffs, the bell above the diner door jingled again, and in walked Sheriff Don Miller, the seasoned county sheriff whose reputation in Redwood carried more weight than any uniform a younger officer wore. His broad shoulders, filling the doorway, his face lined with years of both authority and wisdom, and the room seemed to exhale at his arrival, as though everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for someone older, steadier, to take the reins. Travis, however, didn't pause, puffed up with arrogance, eager to prove himself in front of his superior. So he barked across the room, "Sheriff, you came just in time. Got a situation here, a loiterer, some guy refusing to show proper ID, disturbing the peace." His voice booming with the pride of a child tattling, expecting applause, but Don's eyes didn't even flick toward Travis at first. Instead, they landed on Marcus sitting calmly at the counter, his ID still resting on the Formica surface, and something flickered in the sheriff's gaze. Recognition, respect, a knowledge that froze him mid-step. Everyone waiting and every customer sensed a shift in tension, despite not knowing why, as the silence grew thick. Travis, annoyed that his performance wasn't immediately validated, jabbed his finger at Marcus again, louder now. This man doesn't belong here, won't cooperate, acting like he runs the place, and he thrust the cuffs forward as proof of his authority. Don's face hardened, his voice low but sharp as a knife's edge as he asked, "Officer Cole, did you even look at the identification he gave you?" The younger cop scoffed, waving dismissively toward the counter. "Yeah, some old military card. Probably fake. Doesn't prove anything." The sheriff moved closer, picking up the card, carefully turning it over, and then reading aloud to the entire room, his voice resonant enough to break the silence. "Colonel Marcus Reed." A murmur of disbelief spread to the diner like a quiet fire. "Commanding officer, Fort Redwood." Gasps erupted from the booths, forks clattering the plates, Linda's hand flying to her mouth, and even the teenagers in the corner sat bolt upright, eyes wide as though a movie had come alive in front of them. The sheriff turned his eyes on Travis, his voice now carrying the weight of thunder. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? The commander of the base that protects this entire county is the man you've been mocking and threatening to handcuff. You are able to wear that badge in peace every night because of the soldiers he led." Travis's face lost color as the way his words rolled over the diner like a storm, and the hand holding the cuffs trembled as if the metal had suddenly become heavier than stone. People who had been silent out of fear or shame now screamed incessantly, some bowing their heads in shame and others stealing new glances at Marcus. The officer stammered, his arrogance crumbling. I didn't know," he didn't say, but Don cut him off, his voice like steel. "He didn't need to say a damn thing, Cole. Respect isn't conditional. You give it because it's right, not because of rank. Tonight, you showed this town who you really are, and what you stood for was not the law, but rather your own pride." Travis staggered back a step as the patrons watched, some shaking their heads and others glaring with outright contempt as the words struck harder than any punishment could. And through it all, Marcus remained still, silent, his dignity untouched, letting the truth spoken by another weigh heavier than any defense he could have given himself. The room was no longer watching a confrontation. They were witnessing a revelation, and the balance of power in the diner had shifted forever. The diner had never felt so quiet. Every patron frozen in the aftermath of the sheriff's words, the neon buzzing outside suddenly sounding like thunder compared to the silence within. And in that silence, the truth weighed on every heart. The truth that a man they had allowed to be mocked and threatened was not only innocent, but a decorated colonel, the very leader responsible for the soldiers stationed at Fort Redwood, the men and women who patrolled the skies and secured the town they called home. And shame spread like wildfire, searing faces red, making eyes drop to coffee cups and plates as though they could hide from their own guilt. Travis Cole stood stiff, his cuffs now hanging limply at his side, his pride cracked open for everyone to see, and when he finally tried to speak, stammering, I didn't know, he should have said, the sheriff's hand shot up to silence him, his voice booming. Enough, Cole. To earn your respect, a man does not need to wear his medals on his chest. He walks in with dignity. He pays his bill. He minds his business. That's all that's required. This town, as well as yourself, we're embarrassed by what you did here tonight. The words landed with the weight of a gavel striking wood. And though Cole's lips still moved as if to argue, no sound came, only the hollow echo of his authority slipping away. Colonel Reed, on behalf of Redwood, I owe you the deepest apology, Sheriff Miller said as he turned to Marcus, his eyes steady with something closer to reverence. His tone had softened as he spoke. You deserve more than what you were given tonight. Respect is not owed because of rank or title, Sheriff. Marcus said with the calm gravity of a man who had commanded battlefields and carried the weight of lives on his shoulders as he shifted and finally got up from his stool, his tall frame now towering over the counter. Because everyone possesses dignity. It is due. Tonight, that dignity was tested, not just mine but yours and theirs, and he let his gaze sweep the diner, meeting the eyes of patrons who flinched under his steady calm. What happened here is not about me being a colonel. It concerned the uniformed man who disregards the fact that the badge is intended to safeguard rather than denigrate, and it's about a room full of people who knew it was wrong, but stayed silent anyway. He held up a mirror to the crowd, and they saw themselves not as spectators but as accomplices through silence. In that mirror, his words cutting deeper than any reprimand. Linda, her hand still trembling, finally stepped forward, her voice cracking as she whispered, I should have stopped it. You've always been kind in here, always respectful, and I let him humiliate you because I was afraid. I'm sorry. Marcus's gaze softened, and he gave her a small nod, replying, Courage isn't easy, Linda. Fear is natural, but the choice to stand or stay silent, that's where respect is built. Tears welled in her eyes as she poured him a fresh cup of coffee, her hand steadier this time, as if making amends in the smallest way she could. A young father whispered to his wife, He saved this town more times than we'll ever know, and even the trucker in the corner, who had clenched his fists earlier, called out hoarsely, Should have stood up for you, Colonel, as murmurs began to spread throughout the room. Won't make that mistake again. Each word carried the weight of guilt and the seed of change. During this time, Travis was trapped in his own shame. His authority had been stripped away, and his arrogance had vanished, until the sheriff's voice once more broke the silence by saying, Cole, remove yourself. Until further notice, surrender your badge. You're suspended effective immediately. We'll talk about whether you have any place left in this department after tonight. He stumbled toward the door, the cuffs that had once symbolized his power now nothing more than a shameful weight at his side as the words slammed into him harder than fists. His face was pale as he looked around the diner that no longer respected him. The people whose eyes had once avoided him now stared openly with disdain. The bell jingled as he left, and the door slam echoed like a closing chapter. The town's eyes were on Marcus for a long time as he stood in the middle of the silence he had never wanted. Then he reached into his pocket, put bills on the counter that were more than enough to cover his coffee, and left with the same quiet dignity he had brought when he'd come in. However, as he made his way toward the door, a child's voice broke the silence. The child had asked his mother why the officer was being mean, and as he pulled Marcus's shirt up, he whispered, Thank you, sir, for being brave. And the innocence of his tone pierced deeper than any applause could. Marcus crouched, placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, and said, Bravery isn't about shouting, son. Sometimes it's about staying calm when others lose themselves. Then he rose, nodded once to the sheriff, and walked out into the cool night air. leaving behind a diner heavy with the weight of lesson. Sheriff Miller lingered, his eyes sweeping the room as he said one last thing to the crowd, his voice firm but reflective. Let tonight remind you, sometimes the strongest man in a room is the one who doesn't raise his voice. Keep in mind that. And as the sheriff followed Marcus out, the patrons remained, their meals cooling untouched, their coffee growing cold, each one quietly reckoning with what they had seen and the silence they had chosen, knowing the story of that night would spread through Redwood not as gossip, but as a parable about dignity, prejudice, silence, and the moment a humble veteran reminded an entire town what true respect looks like.